that the Bible indicates that the Sabbath is on Saturday. Why then is the Sabbath celebrated on a Sunday instead of Saturday, even though the Lord told us to keep the Sabbath?
Thank you so much, Sulamite, for your question. And it's so nice to receive a question all the way from Zurich, Switzerland. I think this is the first time that we've had a question from Switzerland, and we're very thankful, and we welcome you all from Switzerland. Regarding your question concerning the Sabbath, there's so many questions that come up about the Sabbath, and a lot of those questions are just like yours. And the questions are also asked by many preachers and people who have just not yet fully understood the topic about the Sabbath. So we'll turn to the Holy Scriptures and ask these important questions that you've raised. To begin with, Sulamite, your question already assumes that we should all be adhering to the Sabbath and the Sabbath rules in our era of time, albeit on a Saturday or a Sunday or any day at all for that matter. So the very first thing we need to address is, do we need to define who God commanded really to first observe the Sabbath in the first place? And the second part of the question is, until when? Well, we have to determine that first before we can claim whether or not we should even be celebrating it ourselves, and then determine, as your question posed, to be done on a Saturday or a Sunday. So, what then does the Bible say about the Sabbath? Let's begin turning to the pages of the Holy Scriptures. Malachi in chapter 4, verse 4, "Earnestly remember the law of Moses, my servant, the statutes and the ordinances which I commanded him on Mount Horeb to give to all Israel." So, dear friends, the Sabbath was definitely a commandment of God, was one of the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses. No question about that. But to be observed by whom? Answer of the Bible: to be observed by the people of ancient Israel. Why? As a symbol of the Lord's covenant with them. It was also an observance commanded by God to commemorate something else. What's that? And let's turn to Deuteronomy 5:15. "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." So, dear friends, God commanded the Israelites to celebrate the Sabbath and to commemorate their deliverance, how God delivered them out of Egypt. Are you an Israelite that was enslaved in Egypt? Because the instruction was very clear, to remember that He brought them out of their enslavement in Egypt. If you were there, if you were a slave in Egypt, you should be celebrating the Sabbath. If not, then not. In fact, can we even pinpoint in the Bible specifically where God actually gave the instruction to stop it, where He took away or retracted the commandment? In Hosea 2:11, the Bible answers this way: "I will put an end to all her festivities, her annual and monthly festivals, and her Sabbath celebrations, all her religious meetings." Dear friends, that was God Himself speaking very clearly, saying, "I'm going to put a stop to it." And the prophet Jeremiah also gave testimony further to God's decision to put an end to the observance of the Sabbath. What did he have to say? The prophet Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 6, "He smashed to pieces the temple where we worshipped Him. He has put an end to holy days and Sabbaths. King and priest alike have felt the force of His anger." So, dear friends, what does this show? Well, it shows after the Israelites turned away from God, their observance of the Sabbath had become actually abominable in the sight of God. The Sabbath ended completely, and the Sabbath was never again commanded to be observed after the time of the Israelites. God put a total and complete end to that commandment. And inasmuch as we're living much later, was there any guidance from Jesus and his disciples concerning the Sabbath in this, what is known as the Christian era of time, and thus would be followed by the church? There is. The Lord Jesus himself stated that, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And he was criticized harshly for that. He healed sick people on the Sabbath day, and so many other things. And when the Pharisees saw him doing this on a day that, the Jews had considered a sacred day, they accused him of, not even being from God. But we all know that our Lord Jesus Christ did not commit any sin when he did not observe the Sabbath. Why not? He knew there was no more Sabbath. He knew it. The Christians in the Gentile world, likewise, they didn't celebrate the Sabbath. And let's take a look at the evidence for that here in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16. We'll also read verse 23. Let no one criticize you in matters of food or drink, or for not observing festivals, new moons, or the Sabbath. These doctrines may seem to be profound because they speak of religious observance and humility and of disregarding the body. In fact, they are useless as soon as the flesh rebels. So, dear friends, here Apostle Paul regarded the observance of the Sabbath as useless, a useless doctrine, and those who then observe the Sabbath, despite having known the true God and been in the true faith, are turning back and are being again enslaved by weak and miserable principles by observing special days, special months, special seasons, or years, or Sabbaths. So, we have learned the instruction for the Sabbath has nothing to do with what day Christ was risen from the grave, as you, Sulamite, posed in your question. And maybe some other preachers may be teaching that or suggesting that in their sermons. Was the Sabbath observance, though, changed from Saturday to Sunday? Simply, no. Because the real question is whether a Christian should even be observing the Jewish Sabbath to honor God's covenant with his ancient nation. A covenant which they ended up breaking anyway. And when that covenant was broken, so too was God's instruction to observe its remembrance. It was God himself who put an end to the observing of the Sabbath. Sulamite from Zurich, Switzerland, and every one of us joining us in this program. That's in the Bible. Thank you so much for your question about the Sabbath, and we hope that you will also send more questions to this program. There is no question, in fact, that's too basic, no question that cannot be answered by the Bible when it comes to our lives, when it comes to our salvation. If you'd like to know more about the basic fundamental teachings found here inside the Church of Christ, please visit incmedia.org. There, you'll find a variety of programs just like this one, dedicated to answering your spiritual questions. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bob Pauline. We'll see you next time on That's in the Bible.